In 1963, as roving correspondent for Kuala Lumpur's Malay Mail newspaper, I posed with William Holden on the set of the movie that would eventually be called The Seventh Dawn. I was covering production of this film, which dealt with the Malayan Emergency and used authentic Malayan locations. A stellar cast was assembled to bring it into being. I understood it was to be based on Michael Keon's novel The Durian Tree, which I had read and enjoyed, but which I did not see as readily translatable into a screenplay. The Durian Tree was Keon's fictitious tale of an Australian planter who operates with Chinese partisans behind the lines during the Japanese occupation. When his former guerrilla comrades retreat into the jungle to take up arms against the British, the disillusioned, battle-fatigued planter withdraws into his rubber estate and raises the metaphorical drawbridge. But because his plantation is spared terrorist attacks, he is suspected of remaining in collusion with the jungle militia. A Eurasian schoolteacher with leftist sympathies is found in possession of incriminating evidence. Retaliating against the draconian verdict that she is to be executed for aiding the terrorist cause, the terrorists kidnap the daughter of the British High Commissioner and hold her for ransom. The deal is simple: her life for the schoolteacher's. But the colonial authorities will not be swayed. The schoolteacher will die within a week, whether or not the kidnapped victim is recovered before she too is killed in retaliation. The only man who can save British honour and perhaps avert the implacable course of British justice is the planter. He's practised in jungle law, terrorist ways, and the mindset of the terrorist leader, at whose side he once fought. But will he be persuaded to come out of his self-imposed retreat and do the right thing? It was clear from the outset that this was going to be a jungle-bashing movie. Much of it spent hacking through the primary and secondary growth, tearing off fake leeches attached to exposed skin, fending off wild animals and snakes, the usual appurtenances of the genre. It seemed obligatory for every jungle movie to have a python draped decoratively over a low-slung branch, directly in the path of whoever is hacking his or her way through the undergrowth. The Seventh Dawn was no exception, except that in this case the normally placid and peaceable python, borrowed from the stock of the U.S. Army Medical Research Unit, was aggravated by arc lamps and beginning to feel both peckish and neglected as it lay restlessly coiled over its carefully positioned branch. The first one along the trail was Holden, who, as the script demanded, raised his arm to aim a revolver, only to be beaten to the draw. The python quite untypically lashed out and sank its teeth into his hand. Fortunately, pythons are not poisonous, but of course the wound, however superficial, needed treatment. Both the python and Holden were stood down, and the scene postponed until the reptile was declared by its handler to be in a more cooperative mood. A more serious production delay occurred when an elaborately expensive mock Malay village was constructed on a vacant lot along Ampang Road. This costly set piece, which took a team of carpenters many days to complete, was required to illustrate the kind of colonial brutality whose inclusion in the script had denied the film crew any support from the British High Commission. Suspected of harbouring communist sympathisers, the fictitious village was to be evacuated and set alight, to serve as an example of the kind of justice other villagers might expect. It was no more than a recreation of several such punitive acts carried out under Templars' authoritarian rule, except that in reality the offending villagers had been, in the main, Chinese rather than Malay. The problem for the filmmakers lay in the fact that Chinese villagers were nowhere near as picturesque and photogenic as their Malay equivalents, and the latter qualities rated higher than authenticity. But that in turn created an even greater problem. The resulting village was not only picturesque and photogenic, but realistic, to the point where, once completed, it was commandeered almost overnight by squatters. Arriving the following morning, accompanied by scores of extras who were to portray the evacuated villagers, the film crew discovered every dwelling occupied. freshly laundered clothing on the washing lines, children playing in the yards, dogs barking, chickens clucking, and housewives busy sweeping their steps and verandas. I personally found the whole scene far more credibly realistic than any result that might have been achieved by stocking it with extras. I even suggested the latter could be dispensed with entirely, and the opportunity taken to film the evacuation of the squatters themselves, which I thought would look far more effective for being genuinely tearful and emotionally charged. But this proposal did not go down too well. What if the squatters turned violent and attacked the cameras and their operators? The result was that we had to stand down and await the arrival of the police, interpreters, and a negotiating team, followed by hours of discussion to persuade the squatters they had no right to be there. By the time this real-life evacuation was completed, it began to rain heavily. Someone suggested that the only guarantee for stopping the rain would be to engage the services of a bomo or soothsayer, possessing skills related to that of the pawang, who had sensed the presence of fish during our fishing expedition in the South China Sea. The Malay bomo is traditionally both faith healer and magician come fortune teller. He has some knowledge of herbal remedies and can supposedly predict the weather. Director Lewis Gilbert thought it wouldn't do any harm to secure this little extra insurance policy. He was curious to see if the bomo's skills extended to both stopping unwanted and inopportune rainfall and turning the taps on again if a scene required the extra aquatic touch. The bomo was duly engaged and arrived to stand beside us, under shelter from the continuing torrent. He smiled enigmatically, assuring Gilbert through a translator, "It will cease raining before sunset, Tuan." Gilbert was visibly impressed and seemingly inclined to give the officially appointed rain man the benefit of whatever doubt he might secretly have entertained. We continued waiting as the invisible sun sank lower and lower towards the horizon behind an all-obscuring cloud ceiling. "Now, Tuan," murmured the bomo, shortly past 5 in the evening, "you will see the rain will stop," and it did, just like that. All heaven broke loose as film crew scuttled madly about, retrieving cameras, lights, and sound equipment from under tarpaulins. "Take your places," yelled Gilbert. With a glorious sunset emerging below the cloud base, the clapperboard clapped, the village extras streamed out under armed guard from their evacuated settlement, bearing their props of lock, stock, and barrel, ducks and chickens, while mock soldiers and policemen rushed around their abandoned houses, throwing flaming torches onto atap roofs. Those squatters who had earlier been forcibly evacuated, but had hung around to watch, added their own touch of poignancy by collectively sustaining a mournful wail, duly exploited by the microphones, while the golden shafts of a dying sun gave the whole thing that added sense of drama. Gilbert smiled with satisfaction.